Welcome. Imagine navigating boardrooms from Copenhagen to Singapore, steering global transformations while challenging the status quo at every turn. What does it truly take to build a boundary breaking career that defies limits, both professionally and personally? Today, we are diving into the art of rewriting rules, embracing nonlinear paths, and swimming fearlessly in the deep end of possibility. Joining us today is Pernille Dahlgaard, a visionary force in global leadership and sustainability. With 25 years of transformation experience across continents, Pernille has mastered the alchemy of turning impossible into I'm possible, whether reshaping corporate strategies or pioneering zero carbon futures. As a key leader at the Maersk McKinney Muller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping, she is spearheading the charge to decarbonize the maritime industry by 2050, a mission critical to our planet's survival. Pernilla doesn't just break glass ceilings, she redesigns the entire architecture. From thriving in male dominated industries to crafting creative solutions in toxic workplaces, her career is a masterclass in resilience, curiosity, and refusing to let no be the final answer. Welcome, Pernille. I am super stoked to have you here. Welcome to the Boundary Breakers Collective. How are you?
Oh my God, I'm so blown away by your very impressive and hyperbolic description of me. But I'm very excited about this talk, and thank you so much for having me. I
Welcome.
feel that you're promising way too much, but I look forward to have a great conversation.
I think we cannot underestimate enough the power of bringing stories, bringing experiences as a source of inspiration, as a source of encouragement for so many women that are sometimes feeling overwhelmed, sometimes feeling uncomfortable, feeling that discomfort in the unknowing. And it is so important that we understand that we have our own choices, that we can make our decisions that are aligned with who we really are, and that we don't have to do what society dictates us. And it's so funny because when I sent you the preparation for our conversation and then I received it and I read it, and the first question is also, why do you consider yourself a boundary breaker? Your answer was remarkable. I don't necessarily, but I realize that others do. So maybe we can start with that because you believe that you are not a boundary breaker by definition, but that this is how others perceive you or maybe the feedback you receive. So let's dig a little bit deeper into that if you want to.
I think what I'm more than 50 years now, and actually, to all those young people out there, look forward to your 50s. That's a fantastic decade. Because as one of my friends told me when I turned 50, that is an age where you have learned so much, you have seen so much, you're able to do so much, and you start to also understand what you can do. And I
Mm.
think what occurs to me is that I don't see myself as very special, and I really don't think I am. But I can see when I talk to people that apparently I do challenge things in a way that many people don't. I'm super humbled by people telling me that what I do is inspirational for them. Who a person who is now a good friend of mine tells me you're very underplayed. And I remember the first time she said it, I was like, what does she mean by that? Because I'm just me. But I can also see that looking over my career, and again, I will totally challenge what you said just before because that's putting me in a way too favorable light. But that yes, I have worked across the world. I have worked in a industry where there are not so many women. I've tried a number of, say, challenges, situations, been in situations that are difficult to deal with, and I'm still here. So I've managed to come out of it. And I think sometimes when I talk, especially to people who are younger than me, it looks like they get some inspiration from talking to me. And if I can, you could say, give the gift of some inspiration or some insights, or maybe do a little bit to take away a little bit of that uncertainty that we all have, then I'm just very happy to do so and delighted that I have that privilege to be able to help other people.
Yeah, I love that. And Pernille, what you're saying is something that I hear very often in terms of I'm not that special. we're not talking about special. We are talking about, like you say, this inspirational energy. And we are all role models, right? Whether we want it or not, whether we are aware of it or not, people are looking at us. And especially when you are in corporate, when you have a specific position, people are looking at you and they try to relate with you and they say, okay, this is an energy that I like. This is an energy that I would like to have also in my life. What is she doing? What is she saying? How is she looking at life? How does she build relationships? And we also have that even if we have no C-level positions, we have that as mothers. We have that as friends. We have that as partners in our businesses, as entrepreneurs. We have it in our communities. People are looking at us. And we better be aware of that because we can inspire or we can be negative. And this is a choice. And we're not aware of that on the impact that we have and the ripple effect that we have. And that's also why I created this stage in order to bring these amazing women that think that they're not special, but that are inspiring and encouraging. And so you were talking about your career, your international career. A while ago, I was interviewing one of these other amazing women, and she said, my career, but also my personal growth and my leadership started once I went international, once I started to travel and to work abroad. What is your experience with that?
I think I've had a crazy privileged childhood. So at the age of 3 years, the age of 5 years, I was brought with my parents to Brazil. I came from Denmark, which this is now back in the 70s. Brazil was a military regime. I came from this super, super safe environment in Denmark where even at the age of 5, I could play in the streets on my own. I had my full, well, as full autonomy as you could have as a 5-year-old, but I could do a lot of things. And then I came to Brazil and I walked in the streets and I remember probably more from that age than most people do because the difference was so massive. And I think that was extremely formative for me. So I remember, first of all, that all of a sudden it was an absolute no-go to go in the street and not hold my mom's hand. So they told us all these stories about Westerners who were like kids who were kidnapped, and that obviously puts quite some fear into a 5-year-old. So I grabbed my mom's hand and I would not let go of that. So that's one little thing where all of a sudden you're being confronted at a very early age with the differences of life, the differences of the world. Also, now you could say the world is smaller, but then again, we are still living in each of our little bubbles. So I think coming out and see how other people work. And I think the other example that I often bring forward, which has been extremely formative for me in relation to moving to Brazil, was that one of those days where I was walking in the street with my mom, strongly holding her hand, we passed by a boy, and I don't know, he's probably been 7, 8, 9, maybe 10 years old. He was lying in on the side of the street, actually on the street, not the sidewalk, and he was eating a rotten lemon. And for a small child who has never not had what she needed, who has been brought up in this totally safe environment with people who love her and certainty that you would have all the teddy bears and all the food and everything you need. That was mind blowing. And I think for me, it has, you could say, enlarged my horizon at a very early stage where I, back then, of course, I couldn't, you could say, rationalize it as I do today, but it certainly showed me that I was very lucky, and it is not a given to be so lucky. Everybody can see, if you see a very poor child lying eating a rotten lemon, that this cannot be that child's fault. Kids can
Yeah.
also see that. So I think I'm pulling out these examples because for me they have been extremely formative. But I think also back to your question around what is it that makes a difference in going abroad, is that you're being confronted with very different ways of looking at things. Another example, that's then much later in my career, I worked in France, and it was a super, super tough environment. And to be honest, I hated going to work. I was miserable. And one day I went to my counterpart and said, I think we're having a really difficult relationship. And I think we should talk about how we make it better. This guy was a French guy, and on a personal level, a very nice guy. And then he looked at me and he was like, Oh, why do you say that? I said, well, but I think we're just so tense all the time. And you're like, oh, but nobody has shouted. Nobody has left the office crying. And I haven't heard anybody slamming the door. So what's the problem here? And that whole attitude showed that I'm probably you tend to say that in the Northern Europe, you're like the temper is much less and you're maybe more consensus seeking. So all of a sudden, it became clear to me that what I thought was super tense, negative, and aggressive, for him was just normal. And he couldn't actually see there was a big problem. You don't you don't see that if you always work together with people who are like yourself. So I think traveling around, seeing how different people react to different situations, and in that context also being curious about why people different. I think that might lead to another point that I think very few people are actually mean. Most people want to do good. Most people want to have a nice life. They want to give their kids a good education. They want to, live peacefully with each other. And that's maybe a very important thing to remember, especially in these days where the whole geopolitics seems you could lead you to forget that. But I still fundamentally believe met very few people who don't genuinely want to do good. But doing good, behaving in a nice way means different things to people.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And we do, like you say, we do live in a very polarized world. We live in a very judgmental world. And I think that we try to do that in order to cope with what you say, what we don't understand, what we don't know, what is different from us. And because of globalization, we are confronted with differences all the time. It's nothing stays the same. And that brings us in our fight or flight modus. And I do believe, like you, that understanding that people's intentions are always positive, even if we don't understand that. And if you can look at the world and at others in a way that you focus on the good and what unites us and what binds us, and have this curious mindset, like you say, try to understand that things are different and that there's no better or worse, that it's just different. I believe that is the leadership attitude that will help us, and that might be, I would say, even rescue us from where we are going right now. Because when you look at what is going on in the world, it's very black and white, and it's people don't matter in the decision making process anymore. And I
Mm.
do believe, indeed, having this international exposure for you at very young age, and for others, like a conscious choice in order to build their career path, is a way to develop that maturity and that consciousness that our framework is not the only framework. Because that's what we tend to think, especially as privileged ones. This is how life is, right? No, it's not for a lot of people. For many people, it's completely different. Yeah. If we look at that international aspect, for a lot of us who didn't have that from our upbringing, we can do career planning, right? We can say, okay, we will study very hard. This is what the system says. We can study very hard and we work very hard. We do some international assignments, and then we can just retire. Like the
Yeah.
system has organized things for you. However, I think that you, with me, based on what you have also prepared for a conversation, that this linear career and promoting and growing, and then maybe job changing to have another job, is not basically the only way to live a life and to organize your life, or just to live your life, because we don't have to
Mm.
organize it. So what's your opinion about that, about linear career planning, and what are alternatives to you?
I don't know. I don't think I know anybody who has made a linear career planning that actually ever became reality. I certainly haven't. I've not done any career planning at any point in time. But there's one thing that I have wanted to pursue, and I've pursued my entire life, is that I wanted to have an international career. I was not so concerned about whether it was in one thing or one industry or one particular function, but I just wanted, I like to travel. I like to explore other cultures. I wanted to live with other people. And that's really the one thing that I've known from I was very little. Um, and then you could say, how do you do that? In my case, whenever I've interviewed for a job, I've said that I wanted to have an international career. What I've also realized is that an international career means very different things to different people. So many people say that they've been or worked all over the world, and that's true, but it just makes a very different, say, experience and level of insight to go for 3 days on an audit trip to, say, Ghana, as opposed to actually living for a few years in Cameroon or Ghana. So I think with many people, that's this idea of simply going to a place that gives you all the insight. And of course, it's much better to go than not to go. But there's also a lot that you only start to understand when you actually live there.
You're
So
talking about
that's what we think.
immersion, really be there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a funny incident when we lived in Cameroon. Back then, that was, you could say, the wrong end of Transparency International list. So it was the worst in terms of corruption and so on. And it meant that regularly we were driving in a four-wheel drive. Obviously, everybody could see through the screens that we were not locals. So that was a magnet to police officers who would stop you, and they would verify that you have all the papers. And it's very bureaucratic. You need to have a blue piece of paper and a gray piece of paper and a pink piece of paper and a white piece of paper. And if any of those are missing, well, then you're being asked for some kind of facilitation, or we have to find a solution, a different word of saying some kind of a bribe. And when we were there, all of a sudden they also introduced that you also needed to have a fire extinguisher. And that seemed to be the trump card they could throw in, because after they had seen both the pink and the blue and the gray and whatever the yellow was, then they would say, oh, that's all nice. Do you also have a fire extinguisher? And most people would be like, oh, I didn't know I needed. But fortunately, we had a very well organized organization around it. So I could actually go out and say, yes, I do. Here you go. And the answer then was one day that that's all very nice. You really have everything in order. So, as such a nice person, would you like to give me some facilitation? So, really turning everything into, you can give me a little gift. And at some point in time, we had some friends coming down and they had been there for a week and we were stopped by the police and it was a little bit tense. So our friends were like, oh, but why are we sitting here? Why don't we just move on? And I was like, I think right now you just shut up. Basically, you keep calm, don't do anything. And those friends that were like, but why are we not going? This is a waste of time. And to me, that illustrated that being in a country where we, of course, talked about the corruption, we talked about some of the difficulties living there, but having been there for a week, they had not at all understood what it meant on a daily life. And it's only when you have to really deal with it in a daily life. And of course, we got out of the situation, everything was fine. But even afterwards, those friends, they were like, but what was that all about? And you're like, that was
Yeah.
our daily life. That's how it is being here. And you cannot apply your Western values and say this is not fair. And well, you can, but reality is this is what you have to live. So
Yeah.
long story to say that living, immersing yourself in a different culture gives you so much more than just coming for a business trip for a few days or like
Mhm.
a holiday where you see all the nice things, but you don't get to understand what is it being here. And I think that is so rewarding. And it also is a fantastic way of questioning your own beliefs. I come from a super well functioning country. In general, there's very little to complain about. But still, of course, it's always good to get a different perspective. To be asked when you say that whatever, you're happy to pay your 50% taxes, is that really the right thing to do? I don't
Mm.
know. I was just brought up that way. I do it happily. But then living in Singapore, where they have a very different system, and I have very good Singaporean friends where sometimes we discuss this. What about how do you motivate people to actually make an effort, to be ambitious and all that? And you need people who think different to enlarge your own horizon, I think. And there, obviously, an international career is one aspect of getting that.
Yeah, absolutely. I also believe international careers give you this landscape of possibilities to practice leadership. And it reminds me of Eckhart Tolle, who has in The Power of Now, this is very simplified, but he has worked out three approaches to towards life or towards experiences or towards events, whatever. And it is either you change it if you can, and then it is about understanding your circle of control. We say that, or Stephen Covey says that, and understand what we can change or not. Either we remove it if we absolutely don't like a situation or an event or a relationship, we just, step away from it. And then there's situations where you cannot do that. And so his third choice is you accept it. And then when I talk about this with people, sometimes they say, you accept it, so you just let it pass. I said, no, that's not what he means. And that's certainly not how I look at it. It is about understanding that there are things that you cannot change and you cannot remove. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it, but you know that this is something that if you go into resistance, you just lose energy because you cannot change it. And accepting it allows you to stay in a place of calm and see how you can deal with it or work around it or whatever. But it is staying out of this frustration or irritation or anger or whatever, because it is just what it is. Like you say, like you have corruption in Cameroon. And a lot of people should say, either you cannot go to Cameroon, that's an option, right? You can just stay away there. But if you want to do something there, if you want to be there, it is about understanding that this is how the system works. And instead of going into resistance, trying to go along with that. And that might seem or sound very strange or harsh to a lot of people, but I would say maybe it's good then to read that book from Eckhart Tolle.
Mhm.
But it is about how you look at life and how you look at events and at situations, and what makes you lose your energy and what makes you build energy and keep vibrations high. How do you look at that, Pernille? Is that something that you
I think
recognize, or is that
I,
something
I, I think
you
you're
think
absolutely
differently
spot
about?
on, and I think it goes back to the Stoic philosophers. They also talked about assessing in a situation, can you do anything about it? And if you can't, then there's no need to spend energy on it, because you can fight windmills if you want to, but you don't get anywhere. I think there's also in the Bible, and that has actually been adopted by the Alcoholic Anonymous and the this what is called the prayer of gratitude. I think it's called, that goes something like,
Mm,
"Give me patience to accept what I can't change. Give me courage to change what I can change, and give me wisdom to see the difference between the two." And I
yeah.
think that's really putting it very nicely. That yeah, there are things you can't
Mm,
change,
mm,
but you can still have an opinion about it, and you can, as with the example of the corruption in Cameroon, our response was to say, okay, then as a minimum we follow the rules.
mm,
So we put ourselves in a position where you you can't ask us for corruption, because
mm,
you only ask for a bribe if there's something that's not right. And of course, some of the rules, like the example of the fire extinguisher, can sometimes put you in a situation where it becomes really difficult. But as a minimum, you can make that effort of say, if you believe in being genuine, if you believe in being straight, then you do that, whatever your environments are doing. And at least
mm,
you make an example of how you think things should be. So I think that
yeah.
there's very much to that whole, maybe also sometimes not over, it might come a little bit with the overestimation of what you can actually change. Accept that things are not perfect. I think there are a lot of people who both blame themselves a lot of things. A lot of people who take responsibilities for things they can't take responsibility for. And it must be super burdensome, I guess I probably also do sometimes. But I think in general, I'm reasonably good at saying this, like, this is not my, it's not my
Mm,
responsibility. It might be my problem. And then you have to find ways of how do you deal with that problem. But the responsibility, you can't take the responsibility of all the, like, world hunger on you. I imagine that some few people will get a lot of energy and do really good stuff, and I'm full of admiration of that. But you can't, you have to somehow proportion the problems you try to solve with what is also meaningful, and what is possible, because otherwise it just becomes so overwhelming, and you end up doing things that doesn't, you maybe you end up channeling your energy into something where you don't actually get any reward for it.
yeah. This is also something that is more typical for women in terms of feeling this responsibility for everything and everybody to go good, to be fine, to be just, to be fair, these inclusive
Yeah.
tendencies that we have, which makes our hearts sometimes bleed in what we're seeing that is going on, where there's nothing that we can change, because it is just what it is. If you're looking what is going on in Africa or in the Middle East, how many women and children are suffering, men also, but it's especially the weak ones that are really suffering. This is not something that we can do something about it. The only thing is, this is how I look at it. It is about being creative in how to keep your energy high and to help and positively impact as many people as possible, and understand that there's a ripple effect and that we can create this consciousness and this awareness that we can do things differently, and be creative in that and be curious in that. And I do believe that creativity and curiosity in everyday personal things in a work environment is also a source of life, of energy, of
Mm,
vibration. Challenging
mm.
the status quo, breaking boundaries, saying, no, this is a system. Why would we keep doing this? How is this serving us? It might have been very useful 15 years ago, but right now this is not. And there's a lot of big systems that we cannot change and that we can question, but that there's very little power to do as individuals. But we can do that in our own lives. We can challenge systems. We can keep growing, keep evolving, keep learning by not doing the same things the same way all the time because we just did it, or because our parents did it like that, or because our neighbors or our communities have been doing it like that. It's basically there
Yeah.
pushing boundaries and pushing
And
systems
and I think
that
there's a
keeps
fine
us.
balance between accepting what you can't change and then also challenging what can be done different. Because
Oh,
I think what I'm often getting, I don't know, provoked is a big word, but puzzled that people say, oh, that's not possible. Like, why? No, because that's not what people do. Or you have all these stigmas or beliefs about, silly example, but when I applied to Maersk back in the late 90s, so the last millennium, I am a bit of a dinosaur. Maersk was back in that point of time the company in Denmark. And there were a lot of myths around. It was a very closed company. They didn't communicate a lot. There was a lot of myth around how everything was perfect and you couldn't do this, you couldn't do that. And one of the examples was that, at least that I was told, was that if, and this was back in the days where you actually would mail your application as a physical piece of paper in an envelope and you would put a stamp on it. And the myth was that if the stamp was not perfectly put with the same distance from the end of the stamp to the side to the end of the envelope on both sides, then it wouldn't be accepted. Well, it's like, wow, that sounds very rigid, whatever. And I'm not always such a detail. So in the moment that I slipped my application into the mailbox, I realized that I had put the stamp very nicely in the corner, but in the wrong corner. So instead of putting it in the upper right corner, I put it on the lower left corner. And 3 months later, I was offered a job. So to me, that was a silly, ridiculous little example, but of saying shouldn't always listen to what people say is possible or not possible. You shouldn't always listen to all those myths around how a given company functions or how people think, because very often I think a lot of these myths come from people who haven't made it in there. And
mhm.
also, when I then joined the company, I realized that those people are actually really fun. So they had I think they still have a philosophy of hiring very smart people with a lot of mental energy. And if you put a lot of very smart people with a lot of mental energy in a room, well, typically that becomes quite inspiring because apart from doing lots of good work and working hard, they also want to have fun. But that was not at all what people outside that company saw. They just saw these very business or very serious business people. Everything should be correct. You could never ever step aside. And then when you get inside and you hear all the stories about what people are doing of really silly things, yes, you should maybe sometimes challenge a little bit. Is this something you think, or is it something you know? And if we say that this is the only way you can do, how do you know that? Sometimes if you come up with a new solution that nobody have seen before, how can you know that it won't work just because previous solutions didn't work? And there I'm often puzzled why people let themselves stop even before they have brought forward a suggestion. You can always say, if we did, I don't know, if you stand in front of a machine and it can either be blue or green, then say, hey, could we make a mixture? If we not nobody wants blue or green, could we then make it yellow? And you can ask. And if people then say, oh, yellow is completely, that's the color of whatever, something unfaithful, I believe, at least in some cultures, then okay, fine. But it doesn't harm to, or in many contexts, it doesn't harm to come up with a crazy solution. And then just don't take it for, if it's being rejected, then it's being rejected, and so what?
Mhm. Yeah. I think it's so important also to install that as a leadership quality. Because if you can do that, just imagine how you will also be coaching your team and be training your team not to take things for granted, not to take the first solution as the only solution. If you can also model that as a parent, just imagine how you will create possibilities for your children and for
Yeah.
your family to be creative, to be inventive, to explore new possibilities, and to live a completely different life. So, this is not only something that we do for ourselves, it's also something that we do for our stakeholders. And if we stick to this, to these routines and what always has been, and also this kind of linear black or white, good or bad, right or wrong system, that's also what we implement in our families and in our organizations. I believe as adults, it's our responsibility to break that open and to do something differently, not only for ourselves, but for all the people that we are impacting. And I want to bring that because we were talking to about the workplace, Pernilla. A lot of this behavior of good and bad and right and wrong ends up in a toxic environment where you have no
Mhm.
voice, where you have no possibilities, where there's again polarization and camps, and where people are bullied sometimes because they think differently or they do differently or they are differently. And we cannot deny that there's a lot of toxic workplace
Okay.
in the world. So you have been in them and you have dealt with them. So how do you deal with them as a leader? And how can women that find themselves in these toxic workplaces, how can they change things
Mm.
for them and for other
I think
people?
I think I'll start to say that I've been in some, but I've also been in very good workplaces. So I would hate that my previous employers hear this and think that I'm saying that they are toxic,
Destructive
because
workplaces.
most of the workplaces I've been at, fortunately, have been quite very good and very inspiring. But you're right that you have, I guess in you have genuinely toxic workplaces. You have also workplaces where you have pockets of toxicity.
Exactly. It can be in
So
one
you can have
specific
a great
relationship, right?
company, but where you have maybe a department that's led by a person that might be super successful when it comes to the numbers, so the top and the bottom line, but the way that person deals with people is just super toxic. And I think it can be so destroying. So probably my take is that the best reaction is just to get away. I think the challenge is that sometimes it takes a while before you realize that it is toxicity. My personal experience is that I've come into a job where after a while, I think I don't perform, or I can see that I don't perform. And the natural inclination for me, and I think for many others, is to say, oh, I'm not delivering. It's my fault. You tend not to look at the surroundings, and especially the longer you have been there, the more your self consciousness is being eroded. And hence you start to doubt yourself, and you can't really see how it's actually not you, but it's the environment. You're not set up for success. So I think really step number one is get away as fast as possible. Changing a toxic work environment is virtually impossible. It's a little bit like if you have a boss who's a psychopath, you also just need to get away. The really bad case, or I've had one really bad case where I couldn't find anybody who could help me. So I think if you end up in that situation, if it is the case where it is a pocket of toxicity in general well-functioning company, you can find people who can help you. And that will probably be the other really critical thing, is to go out and ask for help. If you the worst must be if it's your very first job, because then you don't have any experience that you can pull out of your memory and say, hey, remember, I actually did pretty good before. So having one or two successes behind you should help you to understand that it might not only be you. But even if it's your first job and you don't perform, then there's something wrong. And whether it's you or whether it's the situation, the solution will anyway have to be to make a change. So I think go and ask for help. And my take has always been to go as high as you can. Because often when you have people treating employees or departments or colleagues in a not so nice way, if you get to say C-suite level or SVP level, typically people are they have some good values, because otherwise they wouldn't have made it up there. And if you explain to them that I have been exposed to this and this, and I simply don't know what to do, what would your advice be? Then they'll try to help. And the beauty of going very high is also that you're going to people who don't see you as a competitor. You go to people who see you as a talent that can grow within their organization. So they don't have that, there's not that personal, say, competition element to it. There's simply a often gray-haired person who will say, I'm really sorry to hear that you're being treated that way. I'll do mine to whatever I can do to help you. But I think it is one of the, as Nietzsche said, if you what you don't die from, you makes you stronger. But it's super difficult to be in that situation where you feel that you're not being given support. You feel that you're doing everything you can, and still you just can't navigate the organization, or you don't get the support from your boss or whoever it is, and then still have the energy to go out and say, I need to find something else. But I think really toxicity and psychopathy are some of the worst things, and you just need to escape. But don't hesitate to ask for help. And maybe that's also a quite positive direction the world has taken, that 20 years ago, if you went out and told people that you had been fired from a company, they would look at you like a complete failure. Because 20 years ago, you would go into a company and you would stay there in most cases until you retire 45 years later. And if you're fired, then it must be because something's wrong. Nowadays, in most places in the world, there's a lot more turnaround, and it's much more common that you have restructures that will also mean that some of the good people are being restructured out of the organization. So it's not as much of a taboo to say that you have been fired. I've personally been fired a couple of times, and no, it's not fun. It is, on a personal level, super, super unpleasant. In my case, going home and think about it and then say, okay, what are the real consequences in terms of, do we have financial issues? How long, what's our runway? How long can we handle that I don't have a job? And then what does that mean in terms of finding a job? Have given me some comfort in saying, okay, it's actually not all that bad. But I think, and maybe that also goes towards some of the elements you had in early in this conversation, that a big barrier for many people is to show vulnerability, and being fired or being out organized, so to speak, is vulnerable for people, and it's difficult to tell, and to on one hand insist and still believe that you're actually a high performer, while going out and say, by the way, I'm a high performer, but I don't have a job. It requires, probably, I think some people will say that it requires some courage to do that. And I think what we should think about is, what is actually the worst thing that happens by doing it?
Mhm.
Mostly
Yeah.
when you start to talk about things that are difficult, other people will lighten up and say, I've tried that before, or my husband tried that, or my sister has been in a similar situation. Or we all know fundamentally that life is not easy. Life
Mhm.
is not one long positive trajectory. It has its ups and downs. And
Exactly.
and where we really learn is in the downs, and where it's nice to be is in the ups. So finding a way where you can at least over time gain energy from your downs to make more ups, I think is maybe what we should strive for. And to do that, I think it is so important that we talk about what's difficult and we don't just talk about all the good things.
Yeah.
It's so much easier
Exactly.
to go out and share with your friends that you got a beautiful bonus than to say that everything sucks and I don't know how to solve it.
Yeah.
But it's a latter situation that will give you learnings and insights, and that's also where I think you will also have much more interesting conversations with people. Because it's
Absolutely.
very difficult to have an interesting conversation about the fact that you got a big bonus. So, wow, congratulations to you. Where should we go and celebrate? But if you're presenting a work or a life challenge where you don't really know what to do, well, then at least if you choose your conversation partners properly, they will be curious. They will maybe ask you questions that you haven't thought about before. They might come with different perspective, and that will create learning that will
Mhm.
hopefully both help you and also potentially allow you to find a solution to what you're looking at.
Absolutely. Oh, Pernille,
And
there's so many
maybe just
comments
just
in
just the
here.
last
So,
the last point to this, and back to the most people want to do good. So I've been quite impressed when I've been in difficult situations. I've had when I lived in Singapore, it was really difficult from many different places. The amount of people where when I reached out, I barely met them, or even people that I hadn't met, but I wrote them and said very briefly, I'm looking for my next career step. Would you have time to give me some good advice? The vast majority are super happy to help. So we have a funny, at least in some Western world countries, we have a funny idea that we shouldn't ask for help because maybe people don't want to be asked. And at the same time, most people want to give a gift. And let's look at if you're talking about giving help, that's also giving a gift.
absolutely.
So in the interest of not bothering other people, you actually prevent them from doing what would make them really happy. And
Yeah.
that's a bit awkward. I don't know how we should solve that, but I think simply us having this conversation, say, go out there, ask people for help. Don't ask people for help that they can't provide, but ask for insights, for perspectives, for ideas, advice. Everybody can provide that.
Yeah. Absolutely. I like that you brought that up, Pernille, because that was like my number one, not asking people for help because I didn't want to disturb them until somebody said, you're taking away the pleasure for me to help you, to gift you. And this again is about reframing, right? It's because you have a certain idea, let's not bother people, or another one, especially as leaders, let's deal with our own things because we're the leader. We're supposed to know. We're supposed to make the decisions. Why would we go bother somebody else? And it is about, again, this mindset and how you look at things. If you can shift that a little bit and open up and start in this and entering these conversations, that is so enriching and it's opening so many other possibilities where we might feel that we are stuck because we look at things in one direction and there's so many
Yeah,
possibilities that we don't think of. Maybe also because we just don't activate that part of our brain because we are in our fight or flight modus. And that's not a
could
good
be.
place to be
But,
if we're looking at long term decision making. Yeah,
but I
absolutely.
think that there's a lot
And
of
I love
say
the fact,
misunderstood, like being kind, but you do it in a misunderstood way. So as you say, I'm not going to bother that person, but actually maybe that person would like to be bothered. And,
exactly,
and, and maybe that person wouldn't see it as being bothered. Maybe that person would see it as interest. But
exactly.
from the fear of stepping on anybody's toes, then it's better to do nothing than to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not only in situations where things are difficult or where things are hard or where we do not have a solution directly when we are stuck. The whole aspect of co-creation and doing things together. And even this kind of conversations that we have right now, Pernille, it's like emerging a certain energy, but also a kind of collective wisdom, even if you're only two people. But so asking people for advice, for input, not for judgment, not for critique, but for advice, input, feedback, in order to develop something, a plan, a project, an aspiration, an ambition, that is also something that we need to learn. And it's like you say, it's opening up, it's showing vulnerability. And we are used to do so many things on our own because we think it's going to be faster and then it's going to be a bit better, but it's certainly not richer because it's limited to our own framework. It's limited to what we used to think, what the ways that we tend to work or proceed. And just like you say, traveling is opening your perspectives and your mindset. Working together with other people, co-creating is also opening up for other input that you would never thought of on your own. And I believe that this openness is something that we absolutely should encourage in professional life and personal life in the world in general.
I couldn't agree more.
Mm.
Mm.
So, what is the best advice that you ever got in order to become the leader, to become the woman that you are now, and that you would like to share with our audience?
I don't think I can single that down to one good advice, but my mom always told me that it's better to do something than not to do something. And I think that whenever you're in doubt whether you should reach out to a person or not, reach out. Whenever you're in doubt if you should try something new or not, try it. It can only fail, but at least then you tried. So or she combined it with, I would much rather regret that I tried out something than that I didn't try it out. So I'm really trying, even down to the tiniest little things, to apply. If I'm in doubt whether I should not, just do it.
Mm,
It's very seldom that people get offended. Um, and if it turns out that they do, then go and say that was really not the intention. So do rather than, yeah, when in doubt, then take the action rather than not taking the action. I think that's the primary advice I would bring.
I love that. And taking that as a bridge for my last question, Pernille, what is your next big project? Because you said earlier, I'm a crocodile. Trust me, you're not. You are a mature leader, and I'm sure that you have next projects. So, what is your most daring project for the next period that
I
you would
think
also
where,
use to encourage and inspire other women?
yeah, I'm working in this center where we're trying to push the global maritime industry to net zero in 2050. So that's representing 2.5% of global CO2 emissions. And we're doing it in a rather unusual way in the sense that we are a science-based, independent, not-for-profit. And we have 23 strategic partners who are sending some of their best people into the center. So we're really, you would say, creating a collaboration platform across the full ecosystem where we try to bring people both from the energy side and from technology side and shipping side and customer side and say, how do we solve some of those problems that are super complex? Those that can be solved by one company by themselves, we leave that to those companies. But those where it requires that we are pulling, say, a banker and a energy major and a shipping company and a customer together, we'll try to do that. And then we'll try to say, how can we solve that? That is extremely inspiring. We are 150 people in the center. We obviously all share the same purpose. We are working with some of the biggest multinationals in the world on a mission that is very difficult to disagree with. For me, that's really the project or the big project that I'm focusing on for the coming years. Apart from just learning about one of my favorite hobbies is meeting people that are different from different industries, from different countries, from different people, as I normally say, meeting weird people, and that shouldn't be taken too literal, but meeting people who say something different than I think. I think that's always inspiring. And I try to, we talked about how you need to reach out to people, you need to ask for advice and so on. Some people sometimes reach out to me and ask whether I have time for coffee. And I very much try to accommodate that. So I allocate an hour a day to have a meeting with somebody who has nothing to do with my work, but that gives me inspiration. So those are the big areas. Continue
Yeah.
learning, continue dealing with people,
Mm.
and then
Yeah, it's a beautiful
hopefully
combination.
contribute to a slightly better climate, because I
Better, well,
fundamentally believe
absolutely,
in
and
that.
this is an amazing project to do that. This is like a really big thing, and when you put in your leadership and your openness and your expertise, but also the way you interact with people and the way you look at the world, pretty sure it will be extremely successful. Looking forward to 2050 in order to see what
Crossing
happens
our
there.
fingers.
Crossing fingers.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Pernille, it was great talking to you. We could spend another hour or two or three talking about how we can create a better world for all people and how we can, as women leaders, introduce our leadership capacity and capabilities. But we will do that another time. For everybody that was here listening in, watching this, I trust that you found some golden nuggets here, and keep tuned in for this series, this platform of amazing women that all in their own way try to change the world. And this is something that we can do all together. So thank you for being here. Pernille, thank you so much. You rock.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It has been great being here. Thank you.